We now have Michael Moran, CEO of Transformative Risk Analysis, to talk about it. Can you hear me now, Michael?
I can. Hi.
All right. Excellent. Well, let's get back to the question. Was there any surprise to you that as soon as President Trump announced a pullback of U.S. troops in northern Syria, Turkey would make a move against our allies?
No, not at all. I mean, the quid pro quo there is pretty obvious. The analogy you could draw is what's often referred to as a tripwire force in South Korea, which somewhat dangerously the president has also discussed possibly withdrawing at some points. You take them away, and there's nothing stopping the people across the border with much greater power and all the motives in the world from rolling in and getting what they want. There must have been a very clear understanding of that Russia.
Well, the president has received wide bipartisan condemnation for his move, even from his ally, Lindsey Graham, a Republican. Was this a miscalculation by the president? Because now he's talking about trying to stop the fighting, which he, in effect, green-lighted, and trying to work on a truce.
Well, to call it a miscalculation would assume there was a calculation. I don't think there was. I think this is typical of the way he does things. He's a shoot-from-the-hip guy. He cuts his own advisors out. He has deep disdain for everyone from the intelligence services to the military command structure to his own national security advisors. And he gets on the phone with an authoritarian leader. They cut a deal. That's the art of his deal. And this is the results of his deal.
Yes, let's talk about the results and the potential results. Let's talk about the immediate concerns right now. There's the risk of a humanitarian catastrophe. It seems to be happening. ISIS is still there, and the Kurds are also trying to protect the ISIS prisoners and keep them in prison. They've been guarding them, but now the Kurds are distracted by having to defend themselves. So talk about the risks.
Well, you know, obviously the ISIS threat had been largely contained by the Kurds with the enormous logistical and advising support from the United States, from U.S. Special Forces on the ground. But the Turks were all the time very unhappy with the relationship the United States had developed with the Kurds. The Kurds, both in Iraq and in Syria, are viewed by the Turks as a threat to their territory. They have historically not wanted the Kurds to gain legitimacy, and this was seen as very dangerous in Ankara, that the Kurds were seen not only as close to the United States, but having performed an enormously important service to the United States by being the ones who really shed their blood to defeat ISIS. Now we see a situation where we've essentially, in the words of one Kurdish leader, we stabbed them in the back. I mean, what does this do internationally to the reputation of the United States, which, for better or worse, upholds little status quos all over the planet with its guarantees to the Baltic states, to Taiwan, to South Korea, to countries all over the world who have been told by generation after generation of American presidents that we've got your back. And here we are getting them in the back.
Right. And if Turkey succeeds in creating this new zone, how might that complicate an already dangerous region in the world?
Well, it'll be a huge headache for the Turks. The last zone they established after the first Gulf War was a disaster for them. They held a zone of a number of miles into Iraq, where the Kurds had fled Saddam, in part because we stopped essentially stopped keeping him at bay, and he went after the Shia and the Kurds in his country. They really had trouble there and eventually pulled out without accomplishing a great deal. The Kurdish state in Iraq, in fact, is as strong as it's ever been, and had a very significant independence referendum 2 years ago, which overwhelmingly voted for independence. They don't have it, but they've shown great restraint. And once again, these are not the Syrian Kurds, but another group of Kurds who the United States has promised to please be patient, we've got your back. They must be wondering about that as well. The other part of it, though, is if you look at what the Israelis did in Lebanon in the 80s, they set up a security zone in the southern part of Lebanon, and that became a bleeding wound for them, to the point where they were happy to leave it. It was Ariel Sharon, in fact, who decided to leave, of all people. So it went on for 20 years. They decided at the end of the day it was more trouble than it was worth, and they pulled back behind their borders. So it's no easy thing that the Turks are attempting to do here.
Well, we appreciate your expertise on this, Michael Moran. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It has been